Hello everyone and welcome to Mr. Simplify's tutorials. In this tutorial we're going to look at space analysis or the space matrix. Now space analysis is a technique used in strategic management and planning. And SPACE actually stands for strategic position and action evaluation. In a similar way to a SWOT analysis, a space analysis actually helps us identify internal and external factors that affect our business. And in this way, it helps us understand where we stand today and in what direction we are headed. And since the space analysis is a matrix, also called the space matrix, it is plotted across an X and a Y axis. Okay, and what are the X and the Y axis of a space matrix? In the space matrix, the X axis and the Y axis both have one external and one internal factor. The X-axis has industry attractiveness or IA, which is an external factor, and competitive advantage CA, which is an internal factor. Okay, and the Y-axis has financial strength, which is an internal factor, and environmental stability, which is an external factor. Now, a way to remember this would be the X-axis has industry attractiveness IA and CA. So the X-axis has IA and CA, okay, ending with A, and the Y-axis has financial strength, which is FS and ES. So FS and ES. So the abbreviations ending with A are on the X-axis, and the abbreviations ending with S are on the Y-axis, okay? And each axis actually has ratings from 0 to 6. So, or actually 0 to -6 for the negative axis. Now let's look at how we actually plot a score on these two axes. Now, industry attractiveness is actually influenced by a certain number of sub-factors, and so are all of the other factors, so are all of the other elements of the axis. And industry attractiveness is actually influenced by factors like growth potential, profit potential, financial stability, complexity of entering the industry, and bargaining power of manufacturers. And you can logically gauge why such factors would affect the attractiveness of the actual industry that you operate in. And competitive advantage is influenced by sub-factors like market share, product quality, product life cycle, and customer loyalty. Financial strength is influenced by return on investment or ROI, liquidity, debt ratio, cash flow, investor turnover. Environmental stability is influenced by technological change, inflation rate, demand volatility, price range of competitive products, price elasticity of demand, and so on. So there can be more or less factors which can actually influence these sub-factors which can influence these factors, and they will be decided and deemed relevant by the management. Okay, now that we have identified the factors, what we do is we actually plot the scores for these factors. We score these factors. We need to actually rate each individual factor, while remembering that a high positive score on a positive axis is favorable, whereas a high negative score on the negative axis is unfavorable. Okay, so on the positive axis, 1 is less than 6 and 6 is more than 1, as is obvious. And on the negative axis, a score of -2 is actually more than a score of -4. So you score it from 0 to 6 on the positive axis and 0 to -6 on the negative. And if we actually consider an example, if we look at an example here and actually score all of the elements of industry attractiveness like growth potential, profit potential, etc., etc. So all of the factors are rated. The factors on the positive axis are rated positively, and then the factors of the negative axis are rated negatively. And then what we do is we actually take an average of all of the factors that contribute to all of the sub factors that contribute to each factor. So we take an average of everything that constitutes industrial attractiveness, and we do the same with competitive advantage, financial strength, and environmental stability. And now what we do is we actually we now plot the points on the two axes and join them to create a quadrilateral. Okay, we create a shape, we actually join all of the points that we have just plotted on the four axes, and the axes actually divide the plane into four quadrants, and every y and x axis actually does that. It divides the plane into four quadrants, and now here one of the quadrants of the plane will have a higher surface area than the rest of them. So the quadrilateral that you've drawn will be present a little more in one of the axes, one of the quadrants rather, than the other quadrants. Okay, and so for the example that we've considered, the top right quadrant, which is the first quadrant, has the maximum area for the quadrilateral that we have drawn. Now, the most important part of the whole analysis is to find this quadrant, is to find that dominant quadrant, as each quadrant in the space matrix represents a strategic position that the company can adopt. Okay? Now, before we move on to look at what the actual quadrants represent, let's look at how this quadrant can also be found more precisely, how we can actually narrow down on the quadrant. Now, we've taken the average of the scores that we've given to each factor. So we have taken an average of all of the sub-factor scores. Now what we do is the couple of factors that constitute an axis like IA and CA, we actually take an average of the averages that come out of those two scores. So we take an axis average. Okay, and we do that both for the x-axis and the y-axis. So in this example that we've considered, the x-axis average value becomes 0.425, and the y-axis average value becomes 0.6. So we take those into consideration, and we then plot that on our chart as well. We plot that on our graph, and the axis averages reveal a plottable point, as we can see. And this point is very clearly in the first quadrant. Now this point could have been anywhere. It could have been in any of the other quadrants. It wasn't necessarily going to be on the first quadrant, but it is in this case. So that actually verifies that the area, the prominent quadrant in our example is the first quadrant. And what we do is we actually draw a line through this point to complete charting the analysis, and then move on to actually analyzing the implications. Okay, and now let's look at the four quadrants, which are actually the strategic positions that the company is expected to take. Okay, quadrant 1, which is the top right quadrant, indicates aggressive position. Okay, so this position, if the point comes on this position, this is the dominant position, then the company can adapt an aggressive position. This position indicates that the industry that you operate in is attractive and stable, and you do have a competitive advantage which you can actually strive and just retain. Okay, there's always a threat of new entrants, but to counter this, you could focus on increasing your own market share. So that is the strategic position that you take if you land up in the first quadrant, as we have in this example. Now, quadrant 2, which is the top left quadrant, is a conservative position. Okay, so in this position, the industry is potentially stable, but the growth rate is low in the industry. The company, however, is financially stable, which is great, and in this position the company should actually safeguard its existing products and think about venturing into a different industry, but at a steady pace. Okay, now let's look at the remaining two positions, which is quadrant 3, which is the bottom left and is the worst position to be in. It's called the defensive position, and in this unfavorable position the industry is unattractive. And this also indicates that your company lacks financial strength and competitive products. In a situation like this, it would be sensible to actually keep costs as low as possible, and further reduce investments in the current industry and actually consider leaving the industry ASAP. Okay, and quadrant 4, which is the bottom right, is also called the competitive position. Now, the industry here is attractive and really unstable. Now, unstable industries are always quite interesting. The company here has some competitive advantage, but the biggest course correction here that you need to take would be to improve financial stability. Now, cash flow needs to be strengthened, and the company should look at increasing production efficiency and be more competitive. So, as you can see, whichever quadrant we end up in, we get a strategic option to take, and that is why the space analysis is quite precise, and it can actually give you a good indication of where you are in terms of strategy and where you are headed and where you should be heading. Okay, thank you very much for your attendance. That was a good summary of the space analysis. Hope it was simplified for you, and as always, please like this content, support all of the content in this channel, subscribe, and also like us on our Facebook page, and take very good care of yourself and your families. Take care. Bye.